Hey, welcome to the MMA Prospectus. You get a whistling introduction this week. I don't know. There has to be something. Every event has to be something new. Every show has to be something new. I got to keep bringing something because, I know you all are finicky bastards out there. But I am joined once again by my co-host, Tom Grant, and we are here to talk everything in the world of prospect development, rising fighters, everything new and fresh in MMA, and nothing old and popular and big, basically.
Yeah,
Tom, thanks
we're
for
just
joining me.
not into those mainstream fighters, Zane. We just gotta we gotta find the ones that you can then complain about having known before they were cool.
That's right. This is the hipster MMA show. It's a show for all you people who want to know about the next big thing before they're the next big thing. And, I understand too that for those extra hardcore MMA fans out there saying, well, why the fuck do you spend so much time talking about the UFC then? It's because there are like 530 fighters in the UFC these days, and for everybody but the most hardcore fan, even rising UFC fighters end up kind of sneaking up on people.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast right now that we follow. We definitely I probably to a lesser degree than you, Zane, obviously, because you do all those welcome to the UFC pieces. We both follow regional MMA. I stay up to date. I watch almost all my regional MMA after the fact on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of cherry pick particular people. But it's it's increasingly slim pickings out there because the major promotions are just snatching people up so early in their careers now at every weight class that for the most part you don't hear about a guy until they've been snatched up by somebody.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of the scouting really has to go through. You're looking for deep cuts in Europe right now. That's where the scouting is to be done. Is Eastern Europe, Russian scene, Poland, Germany, France now. UFC starting to dig into France. And you're looking for, a lot of deep cuts in there. Brazil is tough. That market is just so heavily picked over and will continue to be. And Japan doesn't tend, I mean, there's no tape, so it's almost impossible to scout guys out of Japan, but Japan doesn't tend to throw up that many UFC level prospects anymore. So,
Yeah, it's a weird sort of situation, and like you said with Brazil, it's the structure over there just not really built for producing. I mean, they produce a lot of pro fighters, but it's just a weird setup over there. And most of the guys that the UFC are finding nowadays are the major promotions. I mean, it's because of how deep they are in the industry. They know the people they're training with. They kind of get the heads up. Like, I mean, you're talking about getting the heads up when guys are still in the gym working towards their first pro debut.
yeah, well, Bellator especially has become the master of that. We talked last week about how Bubba Jenkins versus Goiti Yamauchi is like the prototype Bellator prospect versus prospect match where you have a guy in Bubba Jenkins that Bellator signed just less than a year, or yeah, just over a year into his pro career, and with only 3 pro fights, and going against a guy in Yamauchi who was toiling away on the Brazilian circuit, fighting like every single month, and had been fighting for a good uh, 3 years and put together like 15 fights in 3 years, and then got picked up for Bellator, and fighting a lot of the kind of competition that doesn't necessarily get you a call to the UFC.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of how. I mean, that's just how it is in Brazil. It's just a lot of really terrible competition. A lot of part-time fighters. There's very you have to very much in Brazil hit that next level or become a full-time fighter. Otherwise, it's just. I mean, and we've seen it. There's just so many weekend warriors down there because that's just the nature of their scene.
Yeah, well, and a lot of guys who are jumping between like kickboxing or Brazilian jiu-jitsu and MMA, and who might, fight one MMA fight every 3 years and then are just sort of gone, or who are like we see a lot out of southern Brazil guys that are just crushing can after can after can after can after can, and they'll build up this like 20-0 record, and it's the kind of thing that the UFC will come and look at, and they'll be like, no thanks, we don't really want this guy.
Yeah, it's one of those things that really common to look at a Brazilian prospect and see a span in their career where they fought once a year.
Yeah.
I mean that's like almost like the quintessential, like when we're looking at Brazilian guys, we look at like, oh, he's had 3 fights and he's been fighting for 4 years.
Yeah, it's either that or he's had 20 fights and he's been fighting for 2 years.
Yeah, those are
Basically.
it's the two extremes, and it's just it's an interesting place that we're at. And I mean, it kind of looks like the UFC is actually slowing down the amount of people that they're signing at this point. I mean, obviously you manage our track of the roster. It seems like that from kind of my perspective. Are they signing fewer people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say last year they made a distinct effort to cut the UFC roster down to about 500 fighters from 600, and they're at 515 at the moment. And I think it seems like they're more or less trying to keep it there. Like if they sign 6 fighters, they're going to cut 6 fighters. If they sign 10 fighters, they're going to cut 10 fighters. If they sign 2 fighters, they're going to cut 2 fighters. And it's very like keeping it at an even keel. So these days it has definitely slowed from the months where they would sign 30 fighters in a month and cut like 3. That was just an insane pace for them to keep.
I just remember there was a span where they were just everyone was there was like this expected amount, like a point where you would get cut by the UFC, and it was the back-to-back losses, wasn't it? Wasn't that like
It
the
used to be you go 0-2, you lose back-to-back fights, at the very most 3 in a row, and you'd be gone. But yeah, the UFC did hit a point where they would seriously, everybody got
just
third or
saying
fourth chances.
just saying that now, just saying, oh, you lose back-to-back fights, you got cut, sounds insane. Like it just sounds so foreign to how it's happening now.
Well, they're slowly getting back to there, slowly.
Yeah,
Like it's still kind of that way for, especially I think guys that they bring on that they don't feel like they have any hype behind them.
yeah,
Like if they bring a guy in on late notice just because they needed some guy, and he's some guy out of a gym who happened to have like a 7-1 record when they needed somebody, and he's kind of an ugly fighter to watch, and he loses back-to-back fights, that guy's still gone immediately. But if they scout somebody heavily and they bring somebody in who's got some hype behind him, and that guy goes 0-3, he might get another fight.
yeah. I just very clearly remember it taking something special for you to be able to hang out past 2-3 losses in the UFC, and now that seems complete. I mean, if you have a fan who only started watching the UFC in the last year or so, it would seem outrageous that you had, guys. We used to talk about, like, it used to be a common point of conversation coming into events, who was on the cutting, like who's going to get cut if they lost, who was fighting for their job.
We used to run a feature on it. We used to run the cut list.
Yeah.
Every event, and we had to stop doing it because nobody was getting cut. It became a useless feature and I've done shows, like I do the cutting room floor whenever they do cut people, and people are always like, oh, well, who do you think's going to get cut next time? I'm like, I cannot even think to guess, because it really has no rhyme or reason to it at this point.
Yeah, man, I remember that feature. I remember the Sherdog Radio doing their Pink Slip Derby feature, just like everyone and now. So it is interesting to see the roster practices normalize a little bit. And what that means is I think we're going to get, at least in some areas, guys staying on the regional scene a little bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, we already are seeing some guys who end up having, wanting to hang out there. I think some fighters are starting to realize they're getting smarter. Like I saw one of our writers had an interview with Justin Gagey today, which I believe just got posted. And he talked to Gagey about he's got 3 fights left on his World Series of Fighting contract, and then he's going to test free agency.
Mm-hmm.
And Gagey was saying, like, I'm not taking a pay cut to go to the UFC. I'm making 80,000 and 80,000 by the time my contract is up. And like, I'm not going to go to the UFC and take a pay cut to do it. Or we're seeing guys like Tom Duquesnoy, who we keep talking about, who has turned down contract offers because he thinks he's not ready yet. And I think in part it's just this idea that like fighters are starting to get a better understanding of like, while the money at the very top of the UFC can be really good, if you just kind of get in there and you get some bare bones contract that is like, okay, well, we'll work you up from the bottom, you could spend a lot of time making very little money with no promise of job security.
I think to a certain degree, we're seeing also the long-term effects of the Reebok deal in that you would take a fight pay cut happily, maybe not happily, but you would take a fight pay cut in the old days because your exposure was so much higher in the UFC that you would get significantly better sponsorships to the point where you heard fighters talking about how, especially if they were like an interesting fighter coming off the regional scene, that they would make more from their sponsorships than they would from their fights.
Yep.
And that's gone.
Yeah.
And now the only thing you're making money off of is a little bit of Reebok money, and then you're making your fight purse, your win purse, and then whatever bonus they decide to cut you in the locker room. And yeah, why go to that uncertainty if you have certainty?
Yeah. I mean, I think because Gagey talked about like one of the things he said too was like, you know, Misha Tate is making 46 and 46 right now. And just sec, sorry, talk.
Yeah. So the part about the regional scene, it's interesting to see the regional scene coming back the way it is, or hopefully we want to see this happen more often, because Zane and I both actually really enjoy watching regional MMA, and in the last couple of years, there's been a noticeable difference as guys have just been swooped up by the UFC, or Bellator or World Series of Fighting, who are just trying to keep pace. Because as soon as you have something like that happen, as soon as one promotion starts grabbing people the way the UFC did, you basically create an arms race where now if you want a viable prospect, Bellator and World Series of Fighting have to operate in the same way. And I guess my thing would be is as the UFC slows down, do we see Bellator slow down and how quickly they're signing prospects?
Well, the thing we've already seen with Bellator, not just to riff off that a little, is that they've obviously changed very heavily the type of scouting they're doing. They want a very specific style of prospect, one that the UFC is not necessarily competing with them at all for. Like we're seeing them, you know, scouting guys who have like great wrestlers with no MMA experience. That's just somebody that, even though they might be a great wrestler, the UFC is just going to be like, we don't want this guy until we know that he can go through 10 fights and win them all.
Yeah, and I just feel like that their whole point is that they're hoping to grab the next Chris Weidman, and that's that they're and it's an obvious high risk high reward strategy that you bet on a guy coming straight into his MMA career, and then if you win big, then you've got him for not a lot of money initially, and then maybe you get first crack at him, and I think long term that's Bellator's. Long-term, Bellator's hoping that they come out of their whole signing binge of wrestlers with 4 guys they can market.
Well, and to actually get into talking about some of the guys who performed recently, we can already see Bellator 151. The best of the bunch so far has been Darian Caldwell.
Yeah, and he's looking like he's going to be. That shot of him suplexing Joe Warren is going to be everywhere for Bellator for a while. Like they need, because I don't think Bellator is not going to viably be able to be the senior circuit and the haven't you always wanted to see this fight circuit that they are currently.
I disagree there. I think that
they'll be able to do it to a degree, but I don't think they're going to make their product that.
Well, I think that I don't know. I disagree. I think fans feel a lot more strongly about how much they hate that than they do about how unwilling they are to watch it.
Yes, I think that's. But at some point, if you're going to be an MMA promotion, I feel like you want to develop your own stars, you want to develop your own talent because
I don't know. The history of MMA promotions is pretty. I mean, it's rife with failure. So
yeah,
I don't think that there's much to like. There's not a lot to recommend running an MMA promotion the traditional way. Like there's
that,
not a lot to say. Like, oh, if you go about it this like slow and steady, like we saw Cage Warriors is like basically as good a small promotion or like a like second tier promotion as you can run out there, and they shut down. They're coming back finally, apparently, maybe, but an organization doing everything exactly the right way and building everyone exactly the right way and doing it all perfect, they still ended up having to close their doors.
I guess that's fair. Those are all fair points in the sense that um, if you try to play the UFC's game, you're going to end up just being a lesser version of the UFC. So you got to offer something different. But at
Yeah,
that point, then why even have a dude like Darian Caldwell on your roster?
well,
Why
because
even try to
that's
build?
I mean that's the smart thing from them is to be different. Is that unlike they're not they're finding guys they don't have to compete with the UFC for. They didn't have to compete with the UFC for Darian Caldwell or Bubba Jenkins. That's the thing is it's not about necessarily trying to be totally different. It's finding places they don't have to compete. They don't have to compete with the UFC for Ken Shamrock or Hoist Gracie or Kimbo Slice or Dada 5000. These guys they either go to Bellator or they have to take fights outside the country.
Yeah.
They have to go out to
Well,
Russia.
and I guess that gets back to my point that right now they're doing the Dada 5000s and the Kimbos and the Hoist Gracies and the Shamrocks. But I feel like at some point we're going to start transitioning more towards what Coker had going in Strikeforce, where occasionally we would get a fight like that, but then we would get a fight with a guy who is like a Darian Caldwell, where they put him in the kind of fight that makes the MMA fan think this guy's a top 3 guy.
I think
This guy could give the UFC champion a fight, and start building yourself up. And then when you lose those fighters, when Darian Caldwell moves on with his career or becomes a free agent or what have you, then you kind of go back to the well of maybe a couple new like masters fights people want to see while you're trying to develop a new star, new talent, and kind of go through cycles or waves.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice. It would. I think it's a nice goal that I'm sure they have, and I'm sure they're working towards it. But it could be years off. Like
Oh
the
yeah,
the market is so difficult out there in order to like break even and run a successful operation that I don't see it like about to turn a corner and be like, oh, they're going to have to stop doing this soon. It's sort of like they're always going to be interested, I think, in competing in finding the places where they don't have to compete with the UFC, and they've been good about it. Like that's, I think, the big thing that they figured out how to do um, that the previous administration could not figure out how to do because their answer to not competing with the UFC was to run tournaments and try to bring guys up from nothing going through tournaments, and that mostly just created a bunch of fighters that nobody was that familiar with and Eddie Alvarez. And so, this is a much more like not trying to find a bunch of nameless guys that they don't have to compete with the UFC for, but just finding every single possible avenue at all times where the UFC is not looking to compete. Like they're going to Italy for their first international show.
mm-hmm.
Like UFC does not give a shit about Italy. you know
Yeah,
like that is the last place that you're going to see the UFC run a show, so that's where they're going.
yeah, no, and that makes sense. And it just again, like the early days of this, to a certain degree, are kind of smack of like Strikeforce One when you had Frank Shamrock fighting Caesar Gracie in
Yeah,
Caesar Gracie's only professional MMA fight. Like But at some point, if you have a guy like Darren Caldwell, your goal is to make a guy like
I know. I'm getting on you about the whole at some point. At some point, you just hope you keep making money. As I
yeah.
think.
I mean, but yeah, and you gotta. I think you just otherwise, what's the point of what's the point of going out there and signing these amazing like high credentialed wrestlers if at some point you don't want to feature them as like the pinnacle of your product?
Because you can get them cheap. That's why.
Yeah, but you can get other fighters cheap also. You're going out there and specifically recruiting guys who could be amazing prospects. At some point, they're going to want that to be the face of their product.
Maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't bet on it necessarily. I feel like fighters that are betting on it, like Caldwell, may find themselves constantly getting the short shrift.
I
Like,
it would be I haven't heard how the fighters in Bellator have felt about their contracts or their employment, but if going just by Coker, fighters love fighting for Coker.
they love fighting for Coker, and a lot of them believe. I've talked to quite a few of them, and a lot of them believe very strongly that they are part of the master plan.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them believe very strongly that they will, especially guys like Caldwell, believe very strongly that by dint of their work ethic and their performances, they will become bigger stars. And
Yeah, I mean,
maybe, I don't know. Like, if I were them, the thing I remember, I talked to Caldwell the other day. I said, going into this fight with Warren, I said, so like, let's say you beat Warren, you're headlining this card. Your goal is you want to get on the tent pole event. You want to get on Dynamite. You want to go fight for Risen. That's gotta be one of those three. Has got to be your goals if you're a Bellator fighter.
mm-hmm.
And it's like, so what's your plan to stay there? Like, what is your plan to get to that level and stay at that level? And most guys are just like, well, I think if I show up and do my job, they'll be good to me. And that's
Yeah.
not really proven to be a necessarily great strategy.
I I kind of feel that I see the larger plan for Bellator, this idea of where they want to go. I kind of feel it's like one of the old internet jokes where it's like step one, put on freak show fights to make money and draw interest. Step two, sign a bunch of unsigned like known guys and develop them into stars. Step three, question mark, question mark, question mark, and step four, like
Profit.
workable long term promotion / profit.
Yeah.
I don't disagree that there's like a step there that like no one is seeing because I'm not sure they quite know how to get there.
Yeah.
But
I think their big goal is to make every one of their tentpole events a massive draw,
yeah,
a massive money maker that people show up for and look forward to, and that has all sorts of weird shit on it, and that you really want to watch. And everything else they want to run as solidly and as like with as much talent on as cheap a budget as they can.
yeah,
And it's just I don't know that the main features of those big drawing tentpole shows will ever be the top performing dudes that work really hard.
yeah. I mean, it will be the same as any other MMA promotion. The guys are going to have some star power. There's going to have to be something about them. But I think if Bellator finds a guy like that, it'll be the same way that Scott Coker rode Nick Diaz in Strikeforce.
Oh yeah, and if Page would actually be, if they could actually get Michael Page into the cage, he would be that guy for them.
Yep, he would be one of them. And Darren Caldwell, I think, exciting enough in the cage, but I think he would have to get way more exciting out of the cage.
Yeah, that's true. Talking to him, not the most thrilling dude in the world. No offense, Darian.
He's coming for you now.
I know. He's a cool dude. Like, he's an awesome fighter. Love him to death. I think he's great, and I'm so glad he beat Joe Warren. And I like Joe Warren. I actually really do like Joe Warren a lot, but I'm glad he won that fight.
Didn't just beat Joe Warren; he ran right through him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big prospect performances. Obviously, Darren Caldwell, Bubba Jenkins. What beat Goiti Yamauchi? I was actually pretty surprised to see that he won that fight. I did not necessarily expect him to. Kind of figured Yamauchi might be exactly the kind of guy that would hand him submission loss. And
I didn't get a chance to see this fight. I
no.
saw the only thing I could find of it was highlights, and it looked like all the highlights were either Jenkins getting takedowns and then Jenkins fighting off submissions. So it
Mm-hmm.
kind of seemed like the majority of the fight was probably Jenkins grinding him out on the ground or grinding him out on the feet a little bit and kind of gutting it out to win, which is kind of Jenkins' MO at this point.
Also worth noting, he's not exactly a prospect because he's been fighting since 2008, but Sirwan Kakai made his Bellator debut, and Bellator was really, really excited to sign him. They thought that he would, they signed him the moment he hit the open market after getting cut by the UFC, and started out with a loss to Joe Timanglo, who's very much like the Bellator idea of an action gatekeeper, that dude that you keep around to buoy up other more interesting fighters.
Yeah.
And Kakai not passing that test is definitely not, I think, what Bellator wanted to get out of that.
Yeah.
So, moving over to the UFC, which didn't have the same prospect pop going in, it definitely had at least one stellar prospect performance, and that was Teruto Ishihara.
Yeah, that was the one. And I honestly kind of, as the fight, we kind of on here said that it was a tough one to call. And as the fight got closer, I kind of started leading away from Ishihara.
A lot of people did. I was surprised to see how heavily
I went back and just
Rosa.
watched his last fight against on the tough finale from Japan and just utterly crashed my faith in him. And yeah, he looked pretty phenomenal. He stuck. I don't know if it was that or if Rosa's just really just ended up looking that terrible because I saw some, it was one of those that I kind of saw some things happening with Rosa on the show on the on and beating Marcin coming off. Marcin's a tough, not an easy out in terms of like if you fought him on a regional show, that would be a pretty tough.
He beat Arnold Allen, so
yeah,
he's
like tough regional fight. Kind of thought that Rosa we might see a step forward here from him. Nope.
No, Rosa has kind of exactly the wrong set of the wrong build and skill set for the UFC, which is that his reach. I believe his reach for his height is not that long. It might be decent, but he's a tall infighter, and tall infighters are like
they are forever derided.
Yeah.
See, Stefan Struve.
Yeah, or Luke Barnett. And, even Scott Askham getting taken down a bunch by Chris Dempsey to start their fight before blasting him off the feet. Like, it's just a frame and a style that, like, you have to be a very special fighter to be a tall infighter that wins consistently.
Yeah.
And
that didn't work out.
No. And Ishihara, like, the thing is that, even though he's still kind of a technical mess, he's just such a great athlete, and very obviously a great athlete. Great timing, great accuracy, great speed, and great power. And that's the kind of thing that, like, you can get away with being with a lot of slop and a lot of mistakes and a lot of weirdness if you have those things going for you.
Yeah.
And I think he's now training out of Team Alpha Male, which
I think would help. There's probably also a big boost there.
Yeah, so he is he's going to be, even if he's not doing, like, I think, he's got his own camp in Japan where he trains most of the time, and maybe even Alpha Male Japan I'm seeing on here. But I think he goes to Alpha Male in the States for at least part of his camps, and that's going to help, if nothing else, it's going to help tighten up. It's going to help solidify his style into something more of a U.S. style.
Yeah. I think being able to train at least part-time in the U.S. is a huge benefit for any Japanese fighter coming up, because we talk about it here all the time. The style of MMA that plays in Shuto and Deep and some of the other MMA promotions in Japan is just not the international style. And when you come over to the UFC or any large Western promotion where they're using the unified rules, it's just a tough transfer to make. And so training in that environment helps a lot, and we've seen that time and again.
It's true. It's true. So otherwise, regionally, see, we had a lot of action that we talked about last week.
I was gonna say it was a really bad night for the guys who the casual, like the general fan considers to be prospects, but in fact are like 30 or over and fairly developed. And Eric Silva and Brandon Thatch both getting just iced in matches that I thought both of them were really winnable for them. I think not to go too, but Brandon Thatch probably getting cut, right?
Yeah. I mean, if they keep him, it's like even if they don't cut him, like he'll probably lose his next fight and get cut. Like the hope that of Brandon Thatch turning into a long-term fighter for the UFC at all is pretty much kind of gone.
Does he need to go down a weight, or does he need to come up a weight class? Because it looks like that weight cut is hurting him bad.
He couldn't. I mean, at this point, what possible damage could going up a weight class do to him? If he's already on the borders of, if not already having lost his spot on the roster, I don't see any reason for him to stick around and like try and force that further.
Yeah, and this is one of those things too that when we talk about it and how there's a level of skills that you need to have to make it in the UFC, but I kind of feel like the baseline one is you have to be a very competent defensive grappler. And given two of his losses have come to very good grapplers in Benson Henderson and Gunnar Nelson, but when Sair Barra-Duharza is submitting you on the ground, even if he spent the last 2 years at Jackson's, like kind of shoring up his ground game, that's not good.
Yeah, CR has never been known as a grappler or even a wrestler. He's he's a sprawl and brawler by nature.
Yeah, who like at times looked. I mean, in his early UFC career, it was the good Lord, this man has no idea what he's doing on the ground.
Yeah,
and so it's for Thatch, it's rough. Eric Silva, he looks like a dude who's actually past the point of his prime, which he has. I mean, he's been fighting for like 10 years. So he looked like a fighter that is past his peak and physically declining quickly.
Yeah, he's definitely got that thing where he looks good in a fight right up until the moment that he doesn't, and now it's more like, he's like, oh yeah, he's competing well, he's doing all right, and then he gets a kick caught and he gets blasted and he's knocked out, and that's it. And
yeah, a lot of people are pointing to the drug testing and possible steroid use, and I don't like to speculate about that because I think most fighters coming from that era were using, and B, I think most of them still are, even with drug testing. I think it's everything we're seeing is much more easily explained by a guy who gets in wars, is now in the 10th year of his career.
Yeah, definitely has more of that feel of it to me. But outside the UFC, we talked about a bunch more guys. I don't know if you saw on this RFA 36 card, unfortunately the main event got canceled right after we talked about it. Ronnie Barcelos versus that dude from Jackson Wink. But Logan Storley fought on the undercard of that. And he fought, admittedly, this guy who's like in his 40s, Lemetra Griffin. But Storley, an NCAA Division I All-American, just put a stomping on him.
Yeah, he got him out of there real fast.
He got him out of there exactly as fast as he should have when facing a 40-year-old can.
Yes. Yep. That's exactly what we should have done. We said about it with Storley last week. He's fighting cans right now, and that's fine.
Yep.
This is literally just cage time for him, and to a certain extent, he hasn't come out of the first round. A lot of people hype that. We get to fight for his fourth, fifth, sixth fight. Maybe get him in there with a tough dude who's not going to go away in one round. Give him some real serious time in there. But hey, I mean,
he's a guy who will probably end up if Bellator doesn't jump on him after this fight, and they might, and if he doesn't accept it, he's exactly the kind of dude Bellator is looking for.
Yep.
Um, if he doesn't go to Bellator in the next few months, then he'll probably be in the UFC in the next year.
Yep. Yep. I think if he gets that one tough test, like a halfway decent regional fighter, gives him like a good test, and he comes out winning, I think all three major promotions are going to make him offers.
Yeah, UFC might wait. They might want him to be at like 5 or 6. It used to be 10 wins, but these days, maybe 5 to 7 wins. But Bellator, I'm sure they're knocking on his door right now.
Yeah.
Also, over on Ring of Combat, Gregor Gillespie won in the main event, as he was almost certainly supposed to do. Another NCAA division champ, and this guy is definitely somebody I have to assume is going to be on the UFC shortlist, because I would assume he would be in Bellator right now if he was going to be in Bellator right now.
Yep. I would not be surprised to see him coming over towards the end of this year.
Yeah, like he got another quick knockout. He's 6-0. He's getting right into the wheelhouse where the UFC is going to be knocking and looking for him any day. And Ring of Combat is a notable notable funnel for UFC talent.
Yeah.
Um,
Is that the card that Arce was on as well?
that was also the card that Arce was on, and he lost in the co-main event for the second time against Brian Kelleher, and probably just means he is not a bantamweight.
Yeah, well, we talked about this last week, didn't we? That we thought that he might need to go down to flyweight. It's looking that way.
Yeah, if he's losing to a big, athletic, grinding wrestler, a wrestle grappler, like, or unathletic, like not athletic, but Kelleher is not. He's not a great athlete. He's just this like grinding wrestle grappler, and if that's kind of dude Arce is losing to, that's a sign that you're too small for your division.
Yep. I mean, that was it's one of those things we talk about in the regional scene. Most guys have to drop a weight class at some point.
And I need to go back, and this is one I really need to catch up on and watch. But the main and co-main events of Titan FC, where Ricky Simon, who I just saw tape on last week and was really impressed by, lost by submission to the exciting sort of live by the sword, die by the sword Brazilian talent they brought in, Anderson Berinha, or Berinja. So I don't know if that makes Berinja a hotter prospect for beating him, but it certainly has the look of the stereotypical prospect submission loss to it.
Yeah.
For Ricky Simon. And Andre Harrison also took a split decision off Steven Silent. I remember we didn't have Andre Harrison on our. He didn't make the top 10 for us as a prospect, and I kind of like this. May be kind of the reason why not. Is that like
I remember looking at him, and then you see the tools, and then just it doesn't really ever come together in a fight.
If it's not coming together for finishes, like that's one of the big things that the UFC really looks for, is they really like to see dudes that get a lot of finishes.
And to be frank, if you're a pretty top flight talent on the regional scene, you should be finishing dudes at a decent clip. Now, obviously, he's been fighting some tough guys.
He's been fighting the best guys available. He's been
going out of his way to fight guys who are when you're decisioning these guys, you're essentially decisioning like guys who could be in the UFC.
Yeah, he's decisioning mid-tier UFC featherweights.
And so it's one of those things that, I mean, basically for the last year and a half, he's been fighting pretty high level dudes on the regional scene. So I think that's forgivable to a certain degree. And
it is, but it does make me wonder if the UFC is actually going to come knocking on his door, or if they're just going to leave him for somebody else to take and just say, you know what, you're not getting finishes. We don't think that you're exciting enough to, because he's probably in a point too where he's got a belt around his waist and he's going to be looking to get paid a little.
Yep. Yeah, you want a couple rungs up the pay scale and up the Reebok scale, and coming in with 12 wins and 9 of them being decision off the regional scene isn't going to really. And I hate talking about decisions this way, because I'm very much of the belief that a decision can be just as exciting as a finish, depending on the fight. But yeah, when you're trying to sell yourself and they flip open your Fight Finder and just scroll down, and they got to go back to 2013 to find the last time you knocked a dude out. Tough sell.
Yeah, I mean, you see with the guys the UFC does bring in that paper record is usually like the number one thing they're looking at. Is they want to see a guy on paper. What's his record look like? Okay, that looks exciting, and then they might watch some tape on him and see if he actually looks like he's as exciting as his record looks. And then like those things, and all together, they're not looking first and foremost at like, okay, what's the most thrilling looking fighter out there? Because if they were, their signings would be a lot different than they are.
Yeah.
Um,
Who else we got? So, we didn't talk about Corey Anderson.
Oh yeah, Corey Anderson. He got a solid. I mean, he's just sort of continuing that slow crawl of a standard prospect. That's the problem for Anderson, is he got into the UFC so early that fans are going to have to wait. It's like, this guy is on like, it'll be, 5 years and he'll suddenly be looking like a potential, not even, like the OSP type of potential contender. Where you're like, okay, this guy could maybe fight for a title if the chips fall right for him.
Yeah, and the fight got some hate because of obviously some of the scorecards.
Scoring was trash. I still think he won, but
yeah, that's why. The 30-27 pretty bad, but he won that fight, and a lot of people were crying robbery. And I don't think unless one round, like losing a round when you should have won it, is like a robbery. No. Yeah.
It was a good stand. It's just he's winning the kind of fights that tell you he's not about to run straight to the top of the division.
Yeah, and he's taking time. And Lawler forced him to stand and trade on the feet a bit more than previous fighters. Yep. He adapted and found a way to win. Again, good sign. Just, man, we're talking about a guy who's just really not exciting fans in his fights so far. But the UFC's holding on to him because he's winning, and who else?
Light heavyweight, light heavyweight does not have dudes that win fights regularly.
They're kind of hoping that at some point, something clicks with this dude as he continues to develop, and that he finds that he has a skill to put people away with.
And that's that happens all the time. It seems like it's pretty likely to happen with him. It's just going to take a while. Like, fans are really going to have to be on that. Like, you just can't expect him to jump up to the top.
He's been fighting for 3 years.
Yeah.
So, give him another 3 years, and then we'll see how he looks.
Yep. So let's go over to the regionals now. I want to talk about some of the guys coming up this week. We don't have a UFC show, but we got a lot of other stuff to look at.
I was going to say, do we want to go to ACB? I mean,
yeah. First of all, Absolute Championship Berkut put on a card today with two top prospects that we scouted, and one more guy that I watched and was immediately super impressed by. So I definitely recommend finding those fights. Abdul Rahman Temirov, top featherweight prospect. I don't know if you watched his fight. He still looks super wild, but he's such a physical freak.
What a finish, too.
Yeah. And he just tossed on an inverted triangle and choked the dude out.
I'm gifting the crap out of this later tonight. I'm going to share the hell out of this finish because holy crap.
Yeah, that tells you what kind of prospect he is. That in like a kind of wild, sloppy fight where he's just messing around a bunch, at the end he just is like, okay, toss on an inverted triangle, we're done. That's it.
We're in a scramble. Oh, look, I've got an inverted triangle. Yeah, I think I'll finish this. I'll try to finish this.
Dude is a ridiculous powerhouse at featherweight. And then Abdul Rahman Zanaev, middleweight prospect. Another great athlete, very flashy striker. Put on a solid showing against can't remember who he fought. Some dude. Portuguese dude. Not even Brazilian in terms of MMA.
I'm not gonna Bironis?
Yeah, something like that. And Zanaev, it was a solid fight. He constantly outstruck him. At one point, it looked like he was going to knock him out. He landed a beautiful spinning heel kick to the jaw.
Yeah. I've got the fight on in the background, but I haven't had a chance to catch up on these because they happen during the workday.
Yeah, and so he landed the kind of awesome, flashy strikes he's capable of. Great athlete, really coordinated, amazing, super fluid in transition between stances and all that. He just doesn't have all the continuous, like small striking tools to put somebody away. Like he's either landing the big highlight reel strike or he's just kind of waiting for his
Yeah.
opportunities.
Where was he on our prospect scouting list?
He was like
He was
top.
number 2.
He was number 2. Was he number 2
He
at
was number
middleweight?
At middleweight, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I remember both of us liking him. Just a fantastic athlete, really fun striker, and a lot of kind of adapted, adapted kickboxing through a whole bunch of Russian
I
crazy
think I heard them
Russian.
mention on the broadcast, even though it was in Russian, they mentioned Taekwondo.
Yes, if
And
I'm remembering correctly, he's a Taekwondo guy who then got into Army hand-to-hand rule set, which is essentially point karate with takedowns.
and he's an amateur MMA champ from Russia. Like
Yeah,
he's on that circuit that they have where they're actually bringing amateurs up through tournaments and
yeah,
all that, and he's one of their champs. So he came
yeah,
up with a very good, long, good amateur record into MMA.
yeah. And
So
he's translating pretty well. It'll be interesting to see. Like, I would expect him to stay on the Russian regional scene for a while.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's not an instant jump over. Especially European guys tend to take, like, it usually takes 4 or 5 years for them to be able to find a
Mhm.
way into the U.S. market.
Yeah.
Also, dude, I saw on this card that I was super impressed by, looked fantastic, is Adlan Batayev, who fought UFC vet Marcus Vinicius, longtime Brazilian fighter, lost out of the UFC, but like an 8-year vet. And Batayev has only been fighting for 2 years.
Ooh.
Batayev looked like just fantastic, technical striker, aggressive,
Oh.
filled all the
Yeah.
space with strikes.
Yeah, I just turned on his fight right now, and I just skipped to like the middle portion of it. Yeah, he
Yeah,
looks fantastic.
yeah, he looks really good. So Batayev is another dude I'm super excited about. And if we're talking about in the future this week, obviously the big thing coming up is Invicta this week, where I'm going to do a whole show on Invicta, so I don't want to get too into it, but there's Amber Brown in the main event at atom weight. You got Angela Hill, recent UFC cut, versus Stephanie Eggink at strawweight, and Irene Aldana at bantamweight, one of the few bantamweight prospects out there. Deanna Bennett at strawweight, Erica Tabercio versus Jinyu Frey at atom weight, and Andrea Lee at flyweight. Those are all really solid prospects for Invicta. Couple other things over in World Series of Fighting. Josh Copeland, UFC cut, is fighting one of the few sort of heavyweight prospects out there. He's actually, one of those dudes that's like kind of getting in shape through MMA and is actually a pretty light on his feet athlete for heavyweight, but just
Yeah.
has so few other skills than being light on his feet.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what happens with him. And a few other people I picked out. A couple Brazilian guys I want to talk about. This Immortal FC card going on this week actually has a few fighters I'm really interested in. Not Tony Gordillo out of Argentina, who I looked at. He just is super wild. But Rafael Nunez has fought over in ONE FC and has been doing all right for his career. He's somebody that might check out. But I'm really actually interested in Anderson Buzica is fighting on this card.
Let me look at this Bazika. Where is he?
He is
Because I looked at Nunez and he looks fairly interesting. Obviously, he's coming off a loss in ONE, and ONE booted him, which I found kind of interesting. He
Anderson.
shot a takedown and got his back sort of taken and had an RNC lock. He got rear naked choked at kind of a weird angle.
Yeah.
But Nunez looks like he's a pretty good athlete, a pretty competent ground fighter.
Yeah. But Anderson Ferreira de Souza Santos, or Anderson Buzica.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
And he is a super tall, 6-foot featherweight, and with a long history in Muay Thai, competitive Muay Thai in Brazil. You can actually find a bunch of his fights online. They're out there. Really solid technical Muay Thai fighter, and just a I don't know how far his MMA career will take him because he's not well rounded. He's not like some amazing wrestler or anything like that. But he's super scrappy, hyper aggressive, and a really comfortable, powerful Muay Thai striker. Kind of got the oh god, who's the UFC bantamweight that knocked out Eddie Wineland, Brazilian Muay Thai striker?
Oh, ooh, oh,
You
yeah, I
know,
know what you're talking about.
uh, Jose Aldo's striking coach.
Oh god, it's like it's the Fight Finder.
I got it, Johnny Eduardo.
Eduardo.
Yeah, he's got kind of a Johnny Eduardo thing to him, maybe Lucas Martins kind of thing. Really powerful, really aggressive, just pours it on everyone. Has been doing pretty well for himself in MMA.
Yeah.
Somebody I'm excited to see going forward. Also coming up here, let's see. Not that he's not a great prospect, but he could be somebody that, if he keeps winning, is headed to the UFC just because they're so fucking short on middleweight talents. But Adam Hunter on this ECC 24, Canadian middleweight, dude is a huge grinder, just like big, powerful, lean you against the cage and pummel you and wear on you for round after round. He's been winning, and like I say, middleweight is kind of a wasteland for talent. Another guy I saw that I'm actually pretty interested in, and he looks really sharp, and was really surprisingly impressed by him. Is I'm going to try and pronounce this. It's a really tough name. He's fighting on SFC in Brazil. Melquizael Costa de Conceição, and he's a featherweight, another tall, lanky, aggressive, sharp, flashy striker, just powerful. Everything is coming in combinations. Great hands, great kicks. Really aggressive dude. He's a dude I'm interested in seeing fight. Interested to see how this weekend goes. You can find his last fight out there. And other than that, Faraz Zahabi's little brother is fighting this weekend.
Yeah?
Iman Zahabi is fighting on another Canada show.
Huh.
And he has actually got like a pretty nice little well-rounded game going on. Hasn't been fighting very long. His only thing is that he seems like he's one of those guys that's always waiting for the perfect strike. Like, does not fill space with volume, is just like waits, and then finds that one power punch that he can snake in on you. So I'll be interested to see what he does. And other than that, not a lot else going on, but few people floating around out there worth keeping your eye on.
Yep, it's gonna be a quiet weekend, good weekend to take off from MMA. If got a movie you want to see, or other stuff to do. But we're about
a lot of dudes
a big run.
Yeah, a lot of dudes that I would highly recommend waiting till after the weekend and then like trying to find video of them.
Yep.
So that's the kind of weekend this is. Lots of people to pick out and try and find stuff on later to see what the results are, see did they win, did they lose, see how they're going forward. But I'm definitely interested in Buzica and Melquizael because they both seem like Brazilian dudes who could potentially get snapped up by a U.S. promotion pretty quick, since that's a circuit that does not let guys hang around, and they are racking up finishes. So,
yep.
On that note, I think that's everything we wanted to cover.
Yeah.
You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us over on Bloody Elbow. If you're watching this right now, give us a like. That's a thumbs up. Subscribe to MMANation.com. That's DOTCOM over on YouTube. That's our YouTube channel. That's how you get all our other shows, interviews, analysis, all that good stuff. We'll be coming at you. I think we already did If I Did It this week. I'm going to have an Invicta Vivisection this week. And then we'll have Knuckle Up and all that. And then we'll be back at it next week, I believe, getting ready for the UFC's Adelaide show before another break. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.